One of the most talked about topics for Guild Wars 3 is what the playable races are going to be. I would be willing to bet that one of the next things we end up learning about the game is going to be a tease about the first of the playable races that we will be able to play as. So today, let's dive deep into some speculation, highlighting the three biggest candidates that are all but confirmed, explaining their reasoning for being in the game, and then rapid fire through some other potential candidates in descending order of their likelihood to be in the game. So let's get started. Starting with the first of three likely races, we have the Asura. Asura were first introduced to players in the Eye of the North expansion in the original Guild Wars. Eye of the North in general focused a lot on highlighting the Charr, Norn, and Asura, who would become playable races in Guild Wars 2, alongside giving some hints towards the Savari. Within Guild Wars 2, we got to experience a lot of the Asura and really learn to understand their culture, their style, and their history. Of course, as shown in both Guild Wars and Guild Wars 2, the Asura used to live underground before being driven to the surface alongside the other underground races by primordial stirring and eventually awakening. As they came to the surface, they made their home amongst a wide variety of ancient, mysterious ruins that we don't really know all that much about. At least, we may not until we play through Guild Wars 3. We knew that the Asura lived underground for a long time, but we don't really know all that much about their history before that, or if they even always lived underground. And as seen with what we know about Guild Wars 3 thus far, it appears that the Asura used to live on the surface before moving underground, where they stayed for a very long time before eventually returning to the surface. Presumably the ruins that the Asura lived amongst when they first returned to the surface are the same ruins that the ancient Asurans used to live in before they went underground. The most notable and talked about being Rata 10, located right next to Or, being ancient Asuran ruins that we know basically nothing about. And Rata 10 may be a major location in Guild Wars 3 if we ever explore just slightly outside of Or. It will definitely be interesting to see just what is going on with the Asura in Guild Wars 3 and to explore their civilization. The biggest question has to be why they went underground in the first place. Were they trying to escape something on the surface that drove them underground, and will we explore that in Guild Wars 3? Maybe they moved as a civilization to live underground because they thought that was the best thing for their people for whatever reason. I think a similar interesting part of this idea is just what the Asurans' personality is going to be. We know them to be incredibly intelligent, but incredibly cocky people who love trying to learn everything they can about the world. Perhaps within the time frame of Guild Wars 3, they are simply quirky little adventurers who are trying to learn as much as they can, and we see the first steps they take towards becoming a scientific race as they begin to learn more and more about magic and how magic can be used for different things. It would make sense that they aren't as arrogant as we see them later on. Additionally, based on the art we have seen, the Asuran have a noticeable amount of body hair compared to how we see them later on, and story-wise, this makes a lot of sense. If the Asura used to live on the surface, it is likely that they would have hair, but as they moved underground for whatever reason, and stayed underground for over 1,000 years, it would make sense they would lose their hair as they would not have access to the sun, which is a mammal body's most common source of vitamin D, which is incredibly important for hair growth. A lack of a sun, thus a lack of vitamin D, means less hair. And the opposite would be true as well. Maybe in some Guild Wars game in the future that is set a long time after the events of Guild Wars 2, we will see the Asura starting to get more body hair again. Next, for another playable race that is pretty much already confirmed, we have the Kodan. Immediately, I know some people are a bit confused about the Kodan being in Guild Wars 3, but ultimately it can make a lot of sense. The Kodan are originally from the far Shiver Peaks, way further north than anything we have already explored, but we do know that the Kodan spread out throughout Tyria in all directions, and eventually essentially being forced to as Jormag began to awake. In the Janther Wilds expansion, we got to meet the Lowland Kodan. I learned a lot more about this specific group of Kodan, but also a lot more of the Kodan in general. We learned through a variety of sources, such as Raya Lycan, Iskaran, and a random matchmaker, that many Kodan journeyed to the lands of Or, some believing they were called there by the Well of Koda. Koda is the god of the Kodan, whom the Kodan believed formed Tyria and all the spirits within it, where the Kodan believed they were specifically chosen to protect and guide all the various spirits of the world. Within Guild Wars 3, we know a major focus on the game is going to be on the human gods as well as the spirits of Or, which based on everything we know about the Kodan, can really set up some meaningful and impactful stories involving the Kodan and Or. Now, unlike the Asuran, beyond the bit we see in Janther Wilds, there isn't a lot present within Or itself that specifically supports the idea of the Kodan having lived within or near Or. But based on everything we know about the Kodan, that makes a lot of sense. The Kodan are very tribal in nature and tend to have their settlements in harmony with the natural surroundings, like how the Shiver Peaks Kodan will use icebergs for their homes while the lowland Kodan make their homes out of renewable trees. So with an ore, it would make a lot of sense that we see no remnants of Kodan civilization, given the fact that this is kind of the intention of Kodan civilization. Though we do know we are getting another map set in ore in Guild Wars 2 before Guild Wars 3 releases, so maybe we will see some historical evidence of the Kodan and ore intentionally added in that map. One last thing I'll say is that the Kodan have long been one of the most requested playable races to be added in Guild Wars 2, maybe only ever being beat out by requests for the Tengu to be playable. So it would make a lot of sense from a real world standpoint for ArenaNet to add the Kodan as a playable race in Guild Wars 2, plus for certain people who only play the Charr in Guild Wars 2 for certain reasons, the Kodan will help fit that requirement for those certain people, as it is unlikely we will see Charr as a playable race, but we'll get to that in a bit. For the final of the 3 most likely candidates for playable races, and it is, of course, humans. The only playable characters in the original Guild Wars, one of the 5 playable characters in Guild Wars 2, the primary race that is focused on in the original Guild Wars, maybe the most focused on race in Guild Wars 2, the primary race that we know made Ore home, brought to Terria by the human gods who made Ore home, the main race arisen we see in Ore in Guild Wars 2, and so on and so on. If it is a mainline Guild Wars game, there are going to be humans, especially when that mainline Guild Wars game primarily takes place in Ore, a human kingdom, and there really isn't too much more to say about them than that. Within the Guild Wars 3 trailer and throughout all of the art we have seen thus far, we see these 3 races focused on, which it feels like these will be either at minimum or potentially at maximum the playable races in Guild Wars 3. But of course, there are some other candidates, including one in the trailer that has been a topic of debate. We see a human character throughout the bulk of the trailer eventually meeting up with 3 other characters, an Asura, a Kodan, and another humanoid. Now the most basic idea here is that this is another human character, and some people may be confused why they are showing 2 humans, but a simple idea is that the main human we see is the representation of the player character, and the 3 other characters are either representations of the 3 playable races, specifically distinct from the player, where these could even be major story characters in Guild Wars 3. Think something along the lines of Destiny's Edge in Guild Wars 2, having a character from each of the main playable races as a part of the group. But potentially, this character isn't a human at all, and is another race that looks like a human, 2 of which are incredibly common in the Guild Wars universe and could potentially be what this character is, Dwarves and Norn. Now I feel like this isn't a Norn, but if ArenaNet told me it was, I would probably say okay, I see it. I feel like this entire shot is so difficult to fully decipher from a perspective point of view. Whether or not this is a human or a dwarf is honestly hard to say. Logically, I feel like it has to be a human, but in my gut it is a dwarf. We'll just have to wait and see. This brings us to all the other bigger candidates that could be in Guild Wars 3, but in descending order, becoming less and less likely to be in the game compared to the big 3 we just talked about. Starting with the race we were just debating with the Dwarves. We know in Guild Wars 2 that the Dwarves have a strong connection to Ore and Ara, and we know throughout this time period that the Dwarves have moved towards this area of the world, and that Dildramore borders that of Ore, and potentially that of the Asuran. Now, ArenaNet potentially shied away from the Dwarves in Guild Wars 2 because they are such a common fantasy race, and beyond them, the races of Guild Wars 2, aside from humans, are pretty unique to the Guild Wars universe. Of course, you have cat-like creatures and goblin-like creatures in many fantasy games, but none that are quite like the Charr and Asuran respectively. Despite that, Dwarves have continued to be a fan-favorite race in Guild Wars 2, and have actually ended up being a pretty big part of both the Iceroot Saga, as well as the Secrets of the Obscure expansion. From a marketing standpoint, Dwarves can also be seen as a good alternative for humans that many prospective players should be familiar with the general idea of, kind of like the Norn, but without being too crazy, niche, or unusual if you will, like the Kodan and Asura. Plus, from a world building perspective, it would be very easy to add them into the game, just given their proximity to Ore and how humanity has gone through their territory in order to claim Ascalon. Next are plant-like creatures. I recently made a whole video about this, with talking about potential creatures in Melandru, the Wardens, and also the Savari. Given the fact that plant-like creatures with Savari are so popular in Guild Wars 2, having a plant-like creature in Guild Wars 3 would make a lot of sense. While there is some logic behind having the Savari, in reality, having creatures in Melandru running around the world is something that we pretty much know for certain is going to exist, and maybe creatures that even we can play as. Whether or not these are specifically Wardens is definitely a topic of debate, but having any plant-like creature would be very fun. Next, we have the idea of demons. Demonic races in general have always been pretty common in the Guild Wars universe, and both the Cryptus and Titans have played a big part in Guild Wars 2 in recent years. Back in the original Guild Wars, other than the Titans, the most common demonic race that we interact with are the Morganites. Now, during the time of Guild Wars 3, the Morganites have not yet been corrupted by Abaddon, but we could potentially see something like that going on. Additionally, with a story that may focus a bit on the history of the human gods coming to Tyria, and with the fact that in some ways humans are demons, we could see another race come to Tyria as well. I think the biggest supporting factor for this idea that we have seen is a type of masked figure that showed up in the trailer and some concept art, which could just be armor covering a human or another race, but could specifically be hiding a race of any type, including a demon. Next is a quick 2-for-1, and that is the Charr and Norn. These two are basically the same idea and same likelihood to be in Guild Wars 3, the likelihood being pretty unlikely. Both of these races during the time of Guild Wars 3, according to what we know, are pretty far away from ore and don't play a major part in the events going on. Of course, these events happened over 1,000 years before the original Guild Wars, and history can always be hazy, especially as empires fall and knowledge is lost. Given the fact that they are both playable characters in Guild Wars 2, slightly increases the chance that they will be playable in Guild Wars 3, but in reality, the most likely scenario is that we will see random, one-off Norn and Charr that are nomads or whatnot. Next are the Tengu. We haven't really seen anything related to the Tengu and anything related to either ore or Guild Wars 3, but we do know they have been a big part of Cantha, which may potentially play a role in Guild Wars 3 just for the sake of a good expansion to market, alongside the fact that the human gods first brought humanity to Cantha, so a Cantha-centric race could make some sense. But really, the biggest reason for them potentially being a playable race is that they are one of the most wanted playable races in the Guild Wars universe. Going into Guild Wars 2, people really wanted to play as a Tengu, and a lot of work was done on making them playable before they were scrapped sometime before the game launched. So going into Guild Wars 3, it could be another opportunity to bring these dreams to reality, although unlikely. Now for the least likely race that has some small chance of happening, and very quickly, potentially any race could potentially be a candidate, because this is a brand new game and we know basically nothing about it. Additionally, there could be a completely brand new race we never heard of before that is original to this game. On top of all that, I'll give a special shout out to the Forgotten, who would definitely be very cool as a playable race, but most likely next to impossible to implement. But for the last one to specifically highlight, it is the Largos. Kind of similar to the Tengu and Kodan, these are a good candidate because they have been one of the most requested races. Additionally, they are pretty mysterious and are a good candidate to have a lot of lore built for them in a prequel game like Guild Wars 3. They also have some connection to ore and are from somewhere in the unending ocean, which ore is adjacent to. But beyond a bunch of tiny things that could make the Largos cool to see in Guild Wars 3, they are definitely a bit unlikely to be in the game, but significantly more likely than, say, the Skrit. And that's the video. I hope you enjoyed. We can confidently say that the Asura, Kodan, and humans will be in Guild Wars 3 as a playable race, and we can speculate that some other races like the Dwarves may also be in the game, but truly we won't know if they actually are until they are explicitly confirmed. I hope you all are taking great care of yourselves. Have a good one, everyone.